Welcome to Marketing Monday. Today I'm joined by Welcome Home experts, Teddy and John. We're going to bring them on in a second, and we're going to talk specifically to salespeople and leaders of sales teams. The questions we're going to answer are you good at sales? How can you tell? And other top questions that Welcome Home gets all the time. They're a CRM, customer relationship management software, and they're in 1,500 communities specifically for senior living all over the country. So they have data, and they know how to measure how you and your community are doing. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion. But first, we have a brand new intro to roll. Hey, John and Teddy.
Hey there, how are you?
You're cartoons now. You're famous.
That was pretty slick.
Wasn't it cool? Yeah. And as our audience may notice, this is normally hosted by Steve Moran, but I am taking over Marketing Mondays. So John and Teddy will be with us on the fourth Monday of every single month and learning all about sales. And we have so much interesting info to get into. We've got the top 5 questions they hear from salespeople. So John and Teddy, why don't we launch into question number 1, which is, how are we doing? What can we do better? And what are we already great at? That's such a huge, how are we doing? That's such a huge question to answer. How do you go about even starting to address that?
Yeah, no, that is a big question. And we get that from every level. I mean, we get it from folks that are in the community, we get it from regionals, and then we get it from folks at corporate. Because the reality is a lot of folks are so busy every single day just trying to do the activities and focused on their communities, even care types within the community, that it's hard to understand, am I doing okay, right? And, you know, with sales, and I used to be mostly a sales guy. Teddy is a sales guy. You feel like you're failing more often than you're succeeding, because even when you get that move in or you get that one deal, you know, you obsess about the ones that you didn't get, right? And it just, and then you kind of wallow and you don't know, right? You can't contextualize. So, I mean, the first thing in terms of how you're doing, we go back and it's like, how do you think you're doing? But you look at benchmarks, right? The nice thing about sitting with almost 100 operators and 1,500 communities across the nation and across the care types is that you can start to aggregate data. And so we say, let's look at benchmarks and see how you're doing relative to those. And ultimately, you start at the very highest level, which is how's your occupancy relative to your peers, relative to the industry average, and is it getting better or is it getting worse? And is it getting better at a higher rate than everyone else, or is it somewhere lagging? And so that's where we like to start, which is just starting to do a comparison as to against the overall industry. And so I would sit there and say, all right, fine. Average industry right now is sitting at 78% occupancy and is growing at roughly a point every single month. There are differences that memory care and IL are above that, and AL is a little below, and you just start there. After that, in terms of how are you doing, it gets into questions as to, do you have a move-in challenge or a move-out challenge? Because a lot of folks in sales, their sales team and their marketing team is doing absolutely everything right, but for whatever reason, occupancy is lagging because folks are falling out the back door. And so that's what you have to start to do, right? It's such a big question that you have to start at the top level and start to dig in, because what we can do better, if it is a move out problem, is different than what can we do better if it's a move in problem. So that's where we start. And I mean, by starting there, you obviously start to get smoke signals as to what they're great at.
Okay, so I'm taking notes. So we've got 78% is industry average right now,
Yep.
with some differences, right, in the specific types of.
Yep.
All right, and we've got, and then you consider, do you have a move in or a move out problem? That's a really good point. Like, just because you're at a lower percentage doesn't mean necessarily that it could be all sorts of reasons, right? So how do you, as Welcome Home, do you help them answer that question?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we certainly help them by showing them exactly where they are, right? But even with prospective clients that we talk to that ask us this question, I mean, for a ballpark, if you're not at 30% inquiry to tour ratio, roughly 27 tour to move in, and then roughly 10% inquiry to move in, that's an average. So obviously you want to be above that, because that's taken from public source data as well as Welcome Home data. So if you are above that, you're likely doing well. If you're below that, there's likely things that need to go in. And then I think the thing that we look at in particular is, because we have the data that we can show our clients, is if your inquiry to tour ratio is below that mark, let's find out why. And there's a lot of underlying reasons why that can happen. If your tour to move in is lower than that, let's find out why. So when you segment it, you want to look at a few different things. First and foremost, you want to understand, do I have a lead volume problem? Do I have a conversion problem of my salespeople aren't good at converting my leads? And do I have an operational problem, which is I'm actually really good at getting them into tour, but then they come into my community and maybe my community isn't comparing well enough to the community down the street that just had a $1 million of renovation and looks really snazzy, right? So maybe the community isn't doing well. Or like John said, do I have a move out problem? So there's all these different layers that we look at, and that's where you have to focus to understand that. And so that's where we get. And obviously the answers vary across the board, but those ratios for inquiry to tour, inquiry to move in, tour to move in are a good start to help.
But
that is,
Leanne, I want to jump on something that you asked in terms of, do we help folks with this? The reason we exist is to help senior living operators in sales and marketing. That's why we exist. We don't exist to build a CRM, right? The CRM is one of the vehicles to help the sales and marketing professionals, but it's a starting point, right? It is there to make their teams more effective so they can do what they're great at, which is connecting with human beings. But then behind that product, we have a customer success manager that's sitting there to figure out how to use it better. We have a customer insights team that is diving into the data and the benchmarks, that's flagging opportunities. And then we have folks like Teddy that, their day job is to talk about Welcome Home and sell Welcome Home, but he's a salesperson. That's what he does. And things that he does will translate. And so if what the customer insights team has identified is a challenge that folks are having in terms of having discovery, we could tap Teddy and his team to be featured speakers there. So our existence is to help.
That's amazing. Well, is there any different way you would answer this question if it were question number 2, which is, so first we covered how are we doing, what can we be doing better? And the other one is, how's my team doing? What can they be doing better? What are they already great at? Is it the same sort of thing?
It's the same thing, but it gets a little more nuanced, because if it's a move out problem, for instance, it's really hard to say what their direct team, right? When it's a regional or a chief sales officer that's reaching out, if it's a move out problem, I mean, what it could be in terms of what can my team do better is, are we selling the right people, right? Are we selling folks that inherently have too high an acuity and it's creating challenges for the operations team? Or are we overly relying on lead aggregators and we're looking at the data and seeing that they're disproportionately churning out of the communities because they weren't a good fit? Are we finding people that have to stretch their budget and almost immediately put a challenge for the operator? So it very much depends on what the first answer is. The other is usually very micro and very personal, right? That you can sit there and say, from a team standpoint, Mary is absolutely fantastic when it comes to getting someone to move in once they've done a tour. But Mary seems to have a really hard time getting the person to book that tour, right? She's a closer, or she's great in person, but she's not so great on the phone. And so what we try to do is, again, make this very human and very specific down to a particular individual. Our tool, again, it's a tool to help folks do what they do best. Well, in most states that allow it, record calls, and you could listen in and start to get very specific as to, all right, maybe you could have phrased it a little differently. So it thematically is the same as the first question, but it manifests itself differently.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I would say that even in some aspects of that, when you're looking into the specific problem, a lot of people have a problem with following up enough. That this is not a senior living specific sales problem. This is a sales profession in general. More often than not, the average salesperson isn't going to follow up in a meaningful, personal way enough times. If you're stopping before 6, you're likely not going to hear back from that person. And then obviously it increases. The more that you can actually have a meaningful touch point with that person and reach out, even if they're not responding to you, the better. More often than not, salespeople, human beings after all, it's a little known fact, but we are human beings that are real people. More often than not, salespeople generally think like, I'm bothering them. I don't want to be annoying. I don't want to be a bother. And I think that a lot of times when you think about what can my team do better? Is my team doing well? Especially when you're thinking of inquiry to tour, that piece is crucial, because at the end of the day, if you're selling senior living and you are in a senior living community, specifically for really any care type, but more, importantly, obviously for assisted living and memory care, you have a service that is detrimental to the livelihoods of those people, that they're really important, that they need. And if you just keep that in mind and you keep reaching out knowing that you are helping people, because that is truly what you're doing, then I think ultimately you can get over that hurdle, and it helps increase inquiry to tour. When it comes into tour to move in, things like that, it is not thinking that your job is done once you've given the tour, right? They've seen the community. Now I'm just waiting for them to make a decision. There's so many factors. The sales cycle can be so long. So what we want to highlight for people is, what is the average sales cycle that they're going to see? How many touch points on average does it take of various different kinds? How many videos do you have to send? How many emails, text messages, phone calls, virtual conference calls that you have to do to get it there? And then ultimately, if you're a community at 100% occupancy, you're still eventually going to have move-outs. You're still eventually going to have people pass away. So if you have that pipeline and you have that knowing what's going on, there's always a sales acumen spot that you can work on. And in some cases, it's even cultivating a wait list to prepare for that move-out. So there are so many different spots where you look at to what's going on and how my team can do better. But those are some of the key ones that I think people can improve upon.
Yeah, and you touched on, I think, a comment that we had, and I'll get to that in a second, that question. But do you know off the top of your head what the sales cycle is to expect, or is it so variable?
So the sales cycle it depends on care type, right? And so that's the ultimate question. It depends on care type. It depends on lead source as well. So the answer, unfortunately, is it depends, right? But a lot of times memory care can be, lessening. I think it was last quarter, it was around 90 days. And then this quarter, it's roughly 80 days. So you can look at things to that nature. But at the end of the day, even things with memory care, you could talk to them 2 years ago and they're like, well, it's not a problem yet. And then all of a sudden today it's a problem. I need to move in next week. Right. So there's that. Thanks, John.
Yeah, but just for some data standpoint, independent living on averages of course lie, but it's still the best thing that most people have to hold on to. Independent living is going to be the longest at over 240 days, and so you just sit and say this is going to be a more of an elongated stretch. You might get lucky and someone decides in 90 days, but you're just as likely to have someone that takes well over a year. Assisted living, you're looking at roughly 200 days. And to Teddy's point, memory care has actually come down a bit and is now at 80 days. And so I suspect it's because folks have been waiting during the pandemic and now are re-engaging, or when they're coming out, when they're starting to realize the need, they're moving much quicker. But regardless, it's a long time. I mean, even in 80 days with memory care, that could feel like an eternity for a sales director or CRD that is worried about getting a move in this month.
Right. Yeah. Jada's working our tech behind the scenes. Could you throw up that comment that was here before there was a question? Jan asks, ours is not a move out, but a move on, passing away. You kind of touched on that. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I think that you have to start to look at who is moving on and how long have they. So there's different issues, right? And again, you want to be able to look at your data and I personally love our reporting suite, and I spent a lot of time looking at our reporting suite. It doesn't have the same pizzazz as being able to initiate a Zoom call from with the click of the button, or do an event planned and invite from Welcome Home. But you look into your move out, and you look at move out. You obviously will go just to those that have moved out because they've moved on. And look and see, are the move outs folks that have been there for less than 6 months, or are those unfortunately move outs that have made the community their home for several years? If the move outs are folks that have been there for several years, then the next step, and it takes a little bit of work, but it shouldn't take that much work, is start to look at your census and do a projection. And we've helped operators do this, to set more aggressive goals. That maybe you just have a census that is now getting skewed in terms of age, and unfortunately that's going to catch up. And rather than having a target that's 4 move-ins, it might need to be 8, because you have to anticipate that you're going to have folks moving on. That's different than if you start to look and see that a lot of the folks that are moving out because they're moving on, are less than 6 months. And then I'd sit there and go, all right, maybe it's not the number of folks that we need to have moved in and the number that we need to sell, but the type. Maybe we're skewing towards folks that are inherently higher acuity, and it might feel a little easier to get that move in, but all we're doing is essentially creating challenges for ourselves down the road.
And I think with that, because it's super important, right? Anytime you look at your resident, you want to look at, the length of stay. You want to look at how long they're going, but you also want to look at the lead sources that they're coming from. And if you can draw a correlation to, I'm moving in a lot of people from these leads and they're moving on within 6 months of hitting the community, that might not be a lead source that you need to go back to. Whether you're at 95% occupancy or 30% occupancy, it is still a good practice to cultivate referral partners as well as lead sources that are producing long-term stays, right? You'd rather do a sale once and have the building, collect revenue from that and have a lifetime amazing, happy residents than have to just be burning and churning a lot, especially, because it means actually taking care of a human being and taking care of a resident that you want to support for a really long time. So you want to be one that is, you bring them in as a part of your family, and you want to do that for as long as you possibly can.
Great. Thank you. The question 3 is still along the same lines of what we've been talking about, but it's even more specific. It's how am I doing in particular? How would you answer that question?
I'll start this one being a sales leader in an organization, constantly having to ask myself that question, right? How am I doing? We get this question from sales leaders, and the first thing that I often say is there's two things that you really look at. The first is, are you good at setting enough goals for your team, and is your team actually hitting those goals? Right. And so if you're looking at that and you start understanding, have I been a very transparent leader? Have I set clear, achievable goals that are still a reach, for folks to get to, that they have to work hard for? And then what am I then doing, enabling as a part of my daily routine to help them do that? And I think oftentimes in senior living, people correlate that to, I'm on the road, however 30 weeks a year, traveling to the various different communities. So clearly I'm doing what it takes. I'm there, I'm working alongside the team members. But I think there's also an aspect of working smarter, not harder, right? So one of the things that Welcome Home does a good job of is when it automatically records all the activities, and you can listen to the phone calls, you can watch the virtual conferences, you can see the texts, you can see the emails, is from my desk in Atlanta, Georgia, how can I manage a team member who is 4 states over without physically being there, and understand what they've done and be able to coach them on how to do things better. So if your week-long plan doesn't include how to adjust certain things without involving even travel and being there on site, and then measuring certain goals. So if you have someone who's struggling at a certain ratio and you want to do a month-long goal for that person to get more tours, maybe inquiry to tour was focusing, and you coach them on, this is how you handle a discovery call, this is how you ask to get the tour, this is how you do things. And then at the end of that month-long goal, if you can see, hey, they had more tours this month than they did last month, right? You can obviously say, I'm doing better. And then it is making it a repeatable and replicable matter across multiple communities and across multiple sales directors. I view that as a really good way. And I'm sure John has other ideas as well.
No, Teddy, I think, and I'm already conscious of time. No, I thought that you hit a lot of the right way. And I mean, so many times there's a degree to which everyone has a sense for where they're struggling, right? And so you just put it back. It's like, all right, where do you think, right, that you could be doing better? And then you could either confirm or deny, based on what the data shows, and sharing what other people will do. Because often people just want to talk through it.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points. I think I like the idea of judging how you're doing by judging how your team is doing, almost, because taking responsibility for their success and sort of failure. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but a lot of times we forget about the importance of training and mentoring and giving people a chance. Maybe they're trying, but they're just don't quite know what to do. The questions 4 and 5 are a little bit different. Question 4, we've talked about reports. What reports are most helpful? Now, Welcome Home, you can generate a lot of reports on a lot of different data. Which ones do you find most helpful?
John's the report guy. I'll let him go.
Yeah. So for marketing, I think your lead source analysis is what's going to be most important, right? Because it's just sitting there and saying, all right, do I have enough leads? Are those leads actually driving to move in? So lead source analysis would be the number one that I would have. If I was someone that's at the regional, what would I most look at? Occupancy and move in, move out trends relative to benchmarks, I think, are incredibly helpful. Also, your sales activity summary, to just sit there and say, all right, I understand the outputs. How are the inputs, right? Are folks doing the activities that are going to lead to the results? Is something that I would look for. We have what's called a dwell time report. So if I'm a sales director, that's the report I want to go into, right? Because the sales director wants to make the sale, right? They're looking for something quick. And so our dwell time report takes all of your database and will break it down in terms of what stage are they in and how long have they been in that stage. And so it starts to isolate down. Here are 14 folks that are all post-tour. that have known us and have been in that post-tour stage for more than 2 months, I'm going to go and re-engage with them very quickly and efficiently in order to try to book that move in and get them moving forward and get them resolved. And then for the ops team, I think the best report is, and we were hitting on it, is either the move out. Well, the best for them is move out by reason, to understand exactly, is there something that operationally that's controllable versus what we talked about that Jan brought up for the uncontrollable. So how can I tighten that up? And then for finance, nothing matters without being able to pay the bills. You start to look at the rent rolls, where you're looking at length of stay, where you're looking at your economics, looking at potential concessions to see if there's opportunities to take rate or to reduce discounting.
Yeah.
So many reports. They're all so fun.
Yeah. The only other two that I would mention just real quickly that I think are super important. One of the ones that as a sales leader that I look at, or that, when I'm doing calls with senior living operators that I encourage them to look at, is lost lead analysis. I think it's huge to know why you're losing leads, and then if it's something that you can impact or not. Having good ideas of what reasons you're losing leads are both impactful for understanding how to tell referral partners what a qualified lead actually looks like for your community, as opposed to also, if it's something that can be fixed. And then the next one is move-in concessions. You want to hold rate. You want to hold rate high, so you want to understand what discounts are going, because you're selling a valuable product, and you're pricing it probably very, very mindful. So if you can avoid doing discounts, that's what you want to do.
I'm kind of with John on the reports are fine. they like, you can look at it and say, oh my gosh, I do not want to run some report with a bunch of data on it, and what the heck am I even going to do with it? But once you understand how to use the data, they can be really gold mines in your back pocket.
But it's overwhelming for so many folks, even within the community. I might have 600 different people in my database, and I'm actively working 300. And yeah, it is so much more interesting to be able to sit there and talk about, what do I need to do with Leanne? But you do need to pull up and sit there, and Leanne is one very special and unique out of 600. But what's the story that I'm getting? I live in the trees, but occasionally I need to understand the forest.
Yeah, that's a lot to juggle, salespeople. For our final question, what do you think we should do to help our teams? That's a good question and a big one.
I think meeting them where they are, right? I think that it is sitting there, anticipating what you think would help them feel successful, and prepping to have that dialogue, but then going and letting them tell you, right? Ultimately, especially as sales managers, right? You're only as effective as the folks that are out on the front lines, right? Meeting with the families. And so if you say, what should I do to help my team? If I have that incremental hour, what do I do? It's listen and coach, right? And the best way to do coach is by preparing. So I think that's what you can do. I mean, there's all kinds of other answers that you can sit there in terms of, you can help with marketing to prepare to make sure that they have enough leads or better leads, but it's not going to be nearly the same as just investing in them as people and professionals.
I think from
every single minute of every single day with Teddy.
I think from my perspective as well, just on that, and just to pile on John's forest and trees analogy, right? As a sales leader, if you're truly trying to help your team, if you can take an hour to just go through some of the reports that we mentioned, or if you're not using WelcomeHome, something similar, to understand what is going on, to be able to tell them, hey, this is what the most qualified lead looks like for you and your particular community, not just our portfolio as a general, but for you and your market, right? It is this demographic. It is coming from this referral partner or this lead source. And then guess what? You have 40 of those folks in your database. Here's how I would go about handling those people. I think it's just helping them understand what's going on, help, to pile on tree analogies, help them understand what's the low hanging fruit right from there that they could just pluck right down and get a quick move in. The reporting itself will tell you so much information, and it saves them so much time, because as we know, the sales directors are so stretched thin with time. And so if they can work smarter, not harder, then they're going to be able to drive those move-ins that help everyone.
That I've gotten from this discussion is listen to yourself, ask questions, listen to your teammate, look at the reports to back up, what you're finding and to find the real core issues. But I just love the idea. A lot of times we feel like if we're a leader in an organization, we feel like we have to have all the answers immediately right away. But you don't. You can ask your team how they're doing and what they think, and then look at the data together. Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely.
That philosophy. Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us for Marketing Monday. We are here almost every Monday nowadays, but the fourth Monday of every month, we're going to hear from Welcome Home, the best CRM in senior living industry, made specifically for senior living. So we're really honored to have you all on, and we will see you next month.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Lena.
Dan.